The suitcase sat by the door for 3 hours before I finally picked it up, my hand trembling against the worn leather handle that had belonged to my mother. I stood in the hallway of the house I'd lived in for 32 years, listening to the grandfather clock tick in the living room, waiting for someone, anyone, to ask where I was going. But Michael was in his study with the door closed, the blue light of his computer screen seeping under the crack. Emma hadn't come out of her room since breakfast. And Jake hadn't returned my last 4 messages, each one marked read but unanswered. The decision to disappear hadn't come suddenly. It had built up over months of silent dinners, of speaking into voids, of feeling like a ghost haunting my own life. Last Tuesday, I'd collapsed in the grocery store parking lot, not from illness, but from the crushing weight of my own absence in the world. The paramedics asked if anyone should be called, and I realized with terrifying clarity that my phone held no recent calls that weren't about appointments or bills. That's when I knew I had to test the truth of my loneliness, to see if my identity had dissolved so completely that even a week of absence would go unnoticed. I left my phone on the kitchen counter, screen down. The red notification light blinked steadily, probably another reminder about the dental appointment I'd already rescheduled twice. Beside it, I placed a simple note. I need some time. Don't look for me. Though even as I wrote those words, I wondered if anyone would. The morning sun cast long shadows through the windows I'd cleaned yesterday. The ones nobody had noticed were finally streak-free after months of neglect. I'd prepared everything perfectly. Meals in labeled containers in the freezer, bills paid through the month, even Emma's favorite yogurt stocked in multiples. The house would run without me, just as it seemed to run with me there, but not really present. Michael's coffee maker beeped from the kitchen. 7:15 a.m., like clockwork. He'd come down in 12 minutes, grab his travel mug without looking at the counter, and leave through the garage. Emma would sleep until noon, then microwave something while scrolling through her phone. The predictability of it all made my chest tight. I pulled the door shut with a soft click that felt like the loudest sound I'd ever made. The key turned in the lock, a small act of finality. I'd taken only what I needed. Enough clothes for a week, my mother's journal that I'd never had the courage to read, and the emergency cash I'd hidden in the attic years ago when I still believed in preparing for disasters that looked different from this one. The motel was 43 miles away, chosen specifically because it was far enough that no one would accidentally find me, but close enough that I could return quickly, when they started searching. The Paradise Inn, despite its optimistic name, was a row of faded yellow doors facing a parking lot where weeds pushed through the asphalt. Perfect for someone who didn't want to be found. Or maybe for someone who wasn't being looked for. Room 19 smelled like old cigarettes and lemon disinfectant. I set the suitcase on the bed and sat beside it, suddenly unsure what to do with freedom I'd claimed through deception. The silence was different here, not the familiar ignorance of home, but something rawer, more honest. I was alone because I'd chosen to be, not because I'd been forgotten while standing in plain sight. The first day passed in a haze of guilt and relief. I kept reaching for my phone, phantom vibrations making me pat empty pockets. Twice I almost drove home, certain they must be panicking by now. But then I remembered last month, when I'd had the flu for 4 days, and Michael had only noticed when he ran out of clean socks. Or Emma's graduation dinner, when she'd thanked everyone except me in her speech, and nobody seemed to find that strange. That evening, I finally opened my mother's journal. Her handwriting, careful and slanted, began with a date from 1978. Today I realized that love isn't always visible, even when it fills a room. I closed it immediately, not ready for whatever truth she'd discovered in her own solitude. Instead, I watched the local news on the ancient television, half expecting to see my face with "missing" underneath. But there was only weather and traffic, the ordinary chaos of a world that kept spinning. Day 2 brought unexpected peace. I walked to the small diner next door and ordered breakfast at 2 p.m., something I'd never done before. The waitress, a woman about my age with tired eyes and a genuine smile, didn't ask why I was alone or what brought me here. She simply refilled my coffee and let me exist without explanation. I realized this might be the first conversation in months where I didn't have to justify my presence or apologize for taking up space. "You staying long?" she asked while wiping down the neighboring table. "A week," I said, surprising myself with the certainty. "Sometimes that's what it takes," she replied, and I wondered what she saw in my face that made her understand. I paid in cash and left a tip that would have made Michael lecture me about budget management. But Michael wasn't here, and his opinions had somehow become the background noise of my entire existence without me noticing when that shift happened. Back in room 19, I turned on my laptop, the one device I'd brought that could connect me to them without revealing my location. My email sat empty, except for promotional messages. Facebook showed Michael had posted a photo from his morning run. "Beautiful sunrise, 8 miles done." No mention of a missing wife. Emma had updated her status about a concert she was attending Friday. Jake remained silent across all platforms, his last activity 3 days ago, before I'd even left. The strange thing was, I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was something else, curious maybe. Like an anthropologist studying her own life from a distance, finally able to see the patterns that proximity had obscured. On the 3rd day, I drove to a town I'd never visited, 20 miles in the opposite direction from home, and parked outside a small library that looked like it hadn't been renovated since the 70s. Inside, the musty smell of old books wrapped around me like a familiar embrace. I found myself in the biography section, running my fingers along spines of lives lived fully, documented, deemed worthy of remembering. Mary Cassatt, Eleanor Roosevelt, women who'd fought to be seen. I pulled out a slim volume about a lighthouse keeper's wife who'd maintained the light for 32 years after her husband died, never receiving credit in the official records. The parallel wasn't lost on me, the invisible labor of keeping things bright for others. I settled into a corner chair that had probably held 1,000 other bodies seeking refuge. The afternoon light slanted through tall windows, dust motes dancing in the beams, like tiny celebrations of neglect. 3 hours passed before I realized I hadn't once wondered what was happening at home. The freedom of that felt like betrayal and liberation, wrapped in the same breath. That evening, back at the motel, I finally opened my mother's journal again. This time I made it past the first entry, through pages where she documented not her days, but her observations. The way my father's laugh changed when he was nervous. How the neighbor's cat always knew when rain was coming. Why she chose silence over argument. One entry from 1982 stopped me cold. Margaret came home from school crying today. She asked if she was invisible. I told her no, but I wonder if I lied. I wonder if I taught her to disappear by example. Margaret. Me. I'd been 8 years old, forgotten at school after a field trip, sitting on the curb for 2 hours before my teacher realized and drove me home herself. My mother had apologized profusely to Mrs. Patterson, but never asked me how those 2 hours felt. Now I knew. She'd understood too well. The motel room's heater clicked on, rattling like bones in the walls. I made instant coffee with the in-room maker. The taste bitter and thin, but somehow more real than the expensive blend Michael insisted we order monthly. Everything here was stripped down to its essential function: shelter, warmth, caffeine. No performance required. I opened my laptop again, this time checking our joint bank account. No unusual activity. Michael hadn't even noticed the cash withdrawal yet. Or if he hadn't thought it worth investigating. Our daughter hadn't tried to use the credit card I usually let her borrow. The mundane cruelty of it all, being so peripheral that even your resources went unneeded. On the 4th morning, something shifted. I woke not with the usual weight of obligation, but with genuine curiosity about the day ahead. The diner waitress, Sandra, I'd learned, greeted me with a knowing nod and brought coffee without asking. We talked about the weather, her grandson's baseball game, the way the town had changed since the factory closed. Normal conversation that required nothing from me except presence. "You look better," she said, while refilling my cup for the 3rd time. "Better than what?" "Than when you arrived. Less like you're carrying the whole world." I wanted to tell her that I'd put the world down, left it on a kitchen counter next to an unread note. Instead, I smiled and ordered pie for breakfast, because there was no one here to judge that choice. After breakfast, I sat in the motel parking lot and watched cars pass on the highway. Each one contained lives in motion, people heading toward or away from something. I wondered how many of them were also ghosts in their own homes, how many were one ignored message away from packing a suitcase. My phone, the cheap prepaid one I'd bought at a gas station, buzzed with its only saved number. The motel office, letting me know housekeeping could skip my room if I preferred. The idea of someone else cleaning up after me felt too much like the life I'd left behind. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in 15 years. I went to a movie theater in the middle of the day. The teenager at the ticket counter didn't blink at a woman alone buying a single ticket for a weekday matinee. The theater was almost empty, just me and 2 elderly men sitting separately, all of us stealing time from something or someone. The movie was forgettable, but the darkness felt sacred. For 2 hours, I didn't exist except as a witness to fictional lives unfolding. When it ended, I sat through the credits, reading every name gaffers and best boys and second assistants, all the invisible people who made the magic possible. I wondered if they ever tested their own absence, if they ever wondered who would notice if their name disappeared from the scroll. Walking back to my car, I passed a missing person poster taped to a streetlight. A young man, gone 3 weeks. His smile in the photo looked forced, the kind you wear for family gatherings. I stood there longer than I should have, memorizing his features, wondering if he'd chosen to vanish, or if vanishing had chosen him. The difference mattered, though I couldn't articulate why. That evening, the 5th night, I checked my email again. One message from Emma. "Dad wants to know if you paid the water bill. Not where are you, not are you okay? Just the assumption that I was somewhere nearby, handling things as always." I almost laughed, but it came out as something else, a sound I didn't recognize as my own. I paid the water bill online at 11 p.m. from room 19 of the Paradise Inn, while eating Chinese takeout from a container that would horrify Michael with its environmental incorrectness. The confirmation email arrived instantly, and I forwarded it to Emma without comment. Within minutes, she replied, "Thanks." No follow-up questions, no concern about why I was responding so late, no acknowledgement that I hadn't been home in 5 days. The casualness of it should have stung more, but I was beginning to understand that pain and clarity weren't mutually exclusive. My mother's journal lay open beside me, turned to an entry from 1985. I wonder if disappearing is hereditary. My mother used to stand at the kitchen window for hours, washing the same dish over and over, her mind somewhere we couldn't follow. Now I find myself doing the same thing, except I'm washing my own relevance away, one day at a time. The next morning, day 6, I woke to rain hammering the motel roof. The sound was different here, more insistent, less muffled than at home, where Michael had insisted on premium insulation. Everything at home was designed to minimize disruption, including, apparently, me. Sandra wasn't working at the diner. Instead, a young man with nervous hands took my order, got it wrong, apologized 3 times. I told him it didn't matter, and meant it. Eggs over easy, instead of scrambled, such a small mistake in the scope of things. I ate them anyway, finding unexpected satisfaction in accepting what was offered, rather than what was expected. A woman at the next booth kept glancing at me. Finally, she leaned over. "I'm sorry, but you look so familiar. Do I know you?" "No," I said simply, and it felt true. The person she might have recognized didn't exist in this place. That woman was a ghost, haunting a house 43 miles away, making grocery lists nobody read, cooking dinners that grew cold, having conversations with people who were really just waiting for their turn to speak. I spent the afternoon at the town's small museum, learning about local history that had nothing to do with my life. Coal miners and flood survivors, women who'd run businesses when that wasn't done, children who'd grown up to change things or die trying. All these lives documented and preserved, while mine felt like it was evaporating even as I lived it. The curator, an elderly man with careful hands, found me crying in front of a photograph from 1954. A family reunion. Dozens of faces turned toward the camera, all of them connected by blood or choice. "Powerful image," he said quietly, offering me a tissue from his pocket. "They all showed up," I managed. "Different times," he said, but his tone suggested he understood what I really meant. That evening, I broke my own rule and drove past a shopping center just 10 miles from home. Close enough to be dangerous, far enough to maintain the lie. In the parking lot, I saw a car like Jake's, and my heart stopped, but the driver was a stranger, texting while eating a burger, oblivious to my stare. I sat there for an hour, engine off, watching families load groceries, teenagers gather in small clusters, couples argue over parking spots, life in all its ordinary chaos, none of it requiring my participation. A text came through on my prepaid phone wrong number, someone looking for Derek. I texted back, "Derek's not here. Good luck finding him." They responded, "Story of my life." I almost asked them to elaborate, to tell me about all the people they'd looked for, who weren't where they should be. But I deleted the thread instead. Back at the motel, I found myself in the bathroom, staring at my reflection in the harsh fluorescent light. I looked different, Not younger or older, but more defined somehow, like I'd been slightly out of focus my whole life, and someone had finally adjusted the lens. The gray in my hair seemed more silver here, less apologetic. The lines around my eyes told stories I was only now learning to read. I opened my laptop one more time, drawn by a masochistic need to check if my absence had registered anywhere in their digital lives. Michael had posted twice more about his runs. Emma had shared a meme about coffee addiction, and Jake had finally posted something, a photo from a restaurant, his girlfriend's hand visible holding a wine glass, the caption reading, "Perfect night with my favorite person." The girlfriend I'd met twice, both times by accident. The girlfriend whose name he'd never actually told me, whom I'd had to identify through social media stalking, like some stranger instead of his mother. I closed the laptop hard enough to make the rickety table shake. My mother's journal called to me again, and I found an entry I'd skipped earlier. The hardest part isn't being forgotten. It's realizing you've been remembering yourself wrong. All this time, I thought I was holding everything together. But maybe I was just holding everything back, including myself. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the parking lot slick and reflecting the neon sign. Paradise flickered. The first day had been dying all week, turning the word into paradis. Even paradise could lose letters, could be reduced to something less than intended. The metaphor was heavy-handed, but I appreciated it anyway. My prepaid phone rang, the motel office. My week was almost up. Would I be extending? I held the question in the air for a moment, feeling its weight. "One more night," I said, though I wasn't sure if that was true. Tomorrow would be 7 days. The test would be complete, though I was no longer sure what I was measuring, or what results I'd hoped to find. The suitcase sat where I'd placed it that first day, still mostly packed, ready for whatever came next. The 7th day arrived with unexpected sunshine, the kind that makes everything look like a fresh start, even when it isn't. I'd barely slept, spending the night reading through my mother's entire journal, discovering a woman I'd never known existed. She'd had an affair brief, ended by guilt with a professor when I was 12. She'd applied to law school and been accepted, but never went. She'd written poetry that was actually good, painted watercolors that she'd hidden in the attic, learned Italian from library tapes for a trip she never took. All these secret selves buried under the weight of being needed in specific, limiting ways. At 9 a.m., I did something I hadn't planned. I called my sister Carol in Portland, using the motel's landline because she'd recognize any other number and might not answer. We hadn't spoken in 3 years, not since the argument about Dad's funeral arrangements, when she'd accused me of martyring myself, and I'd accused her of abandoning everyone. "Hello?" Her voice was exactly the same, cautious, slightly annoyed at being interrupted. "It's me." The silence stretched so long, I thought she'd hung up. Then, "Margaret, what's wrong? Whose phone is this?" "Nothing's wrong. I just wanted to hear your voice." "Are you dying?" "No." "Is Michael dying?" "No." "Then what?" She stopped herself. I could hear her breathing, recalibrating. "Where are you calling from?" "A motel." This time the silence had a different quality, like she was piecing something together. "How long have you been gone?" "How did you know I was gone?" "You wouldn't call me from home. Too many witnesses to weakness." The old sharpness was there, but underneath, something else. "How long, Maggie?" Nobody had called me Maggie in 20 years. "A week. Today's the last day." "Do they know where you are?" No. Do they know you're gone? The question I'd been afraid to ask myself, voiced by someone who'd made her own escape permanent, moving 3,000 miles away without apology. I left a note, I said weakly. Carol laughed, not cruel, but knowing. Let me guess. Something vague, something that could mean you went to the store or to another dimension entirely. I need some time. Don't look for me. Jesus, Maggie, even your disappearing act is polite. We talked for an hour, the years collapsing between us. She told me about her divorce, finalized 6 months ago, which she hadn't mentioned because she knew I'd try to fix it. I told her about the grocery store parking lot, about becoming transparent in my own life. She said she wasn't surprised. She'd watched it happening for years, she said. Watched me fold myself smaller and smaller, until I could fit in the spaces other people left behind. Why didn't you say something? I asked. Would you have listened? You were so committed to being necessary that you couldn't see you were just being used. After we hung up with promises to talk again soon, that we both knew might not be kept, I sat on the motel bed and cried properly for the first time all week. Not the silent tears of self-pity, but something rawer, more animal. The kind of crying that changes the shape of your face, that leaves you emptied and somehow cleaner. Sandra was back at the diner for lunch. She took one look at me and brought coffee and pie without asking. Last day? She asked. How did you know? Honey, I've been working here 15 years. I know the difference between running to and running from. You've got that time to decide look. What usually happens? With people like me? She refilled my coffee, considering. About half go back, half keep going. A few come back later, but different. Which do you think I'll do? Doesn't matter what I think, but I will say this. You don't look like someone who's done disappearing yet. You look like someone just starting to appear. That afternoon, I did the strangest thing of all. I drove to a tattoo parlor I'd passed 3 times during my walks. The artist, a young woman with sleeves of botanical illustrations climbing her arms, didn't blink when a 63-year-old woman in sensible clothes asked for a consultation. First tattoo? She asked. First everything lately. She showed me portfolios, discussed placement and size. I settled on something simple, a small constellation on my wrist, the Pleiades. 7 stars, 1 for each day of this exile, but also the 7 sisters from mythology who were transformed into stars to escape pursuit. The metaphor wasn't subtle, but I was past caring about subtlety. This will be permanent, she warned before starting. Good, I said, and meant it. The pain was less than expected. A bee sting repeated, a small price for marking my own body with my own choice. As she worked, she told me about her clients, how many of them were women my age or older, reclaiming skin that had belonged to everyone but themselves. Walking back to the motel with my wrist wrapped, I felt the weight of decision approaching. 7 days were almost up. I'd learned what I'd come to learn, though it wasn't what I'd expected. They weren't looking for me. That much was clear. But more importantly, I wasn't looking for them anymore either. Not in the desperate way I had been. Not with a need that had defined me for so long. That evening, my last in room 19, I finally checked my real email from my phone, which I'd retrieved from my car, where I'd hidden it all week. 17 work emails about the library fundraiser I was supposedly organizing. 12 spam messages. 3 from Emma all about money or household logistics. 1 from Michael sent yesterday. Where did you put the insurance papers? Need them for tomorrow? Nothing about where I was. Nothing about if I was safe. Nothing about missing me. But there was something else. A voice message from an unknown number left 2 days ago. I almost deleted it, then pressed play. Mrs. Patterson, this is Julia, from the grief counseling group you attended last month. You probably don't remember me. I sat in the back and never spoke. I just wanted to check on you. You said something that last meeting about feeling like you died, but nobody had held a funeral. And I can't stop thinking about that. I know you don't know me, but if you need to talk, I'm here. I played it 3 times. A stranger had noticed my absence from a group I'd attended exactly twice. A stranger had heard something in my voice that my own family had missed for years. I saved the message, though I wasn't sure I'd ever call back. Sometimes, just being seen once is enough to prove you exist. At midnight, I sat with my mother's journal one last time. The final entry, dated a week before she died, was brief. I've decided to stop waiting for permission to be myself. It may be too late, but too late is better than never. I'm going to tell Margaret the truth about everything. She deserves to know that invisibility is a choice, not a fate. She died before she could tell me. A heart attack in the garden, trowel still in her hand, found by my father when he came home from work. I'd always thought she died keeping things beautiful for others. Now I wondered if she'd been planting something just for herself. I pulled out a piece of motel stationery and began to write. Not a note this time, but a letter. Michael, by the time you read this, I'll have been gone a week. I know you haven't noticed the water bill got paid after all, and I'm guessing you found the insurance papers in the file marked insurance, where they've always been. I'm not angry anymore. That surprises me too. Anger requires energy, and I've spent so much energy being everything to everyone that I forgot to be anything to myself. You didn't make me invisible. I participated in my own disappearance, one accommodation at a time, one swallowed opinion after another, until I became so transparent you could look right through me to whatever was more important. I'm not coming back. Not to that version of us, anyway. The house is yours to figure out. The mortgage information is in the desk, second drawer. Emma's trust fund details are in the safety deposit box. Jake has my mother's china, though he doesn't know it yet. I've already had it shipped to his apartment. Maybe his girlfriend will appreciate it. I'm keeping the car. I paid for it with money I earned from the freelance work you never knew I did, during all those hours you thought I was at book club. Turns out I'm an excellent grant writer. Who knew? Don't look for me. Not because I'm hiding, but because the person you'd be looking for doesn't exist anymore. She evaporated slowly, like water on a hot day, so gradually nobody noticed until the glass was empty. I stopped writing, then added, "Tell Emma I love her, but I can't keep loving her more than I love myself. The same goes for Jake, if he ever asks. He won't ask." I sealed it in a motel envelope and addressed it to my own house. The irony wasn't lost on me, mailing a letter to a life I was about to leave, like sending a goodbye to a ghost. The sunrise on day 8 was spectacular, all oranges and purples bleeding across the sky like a promise. I loaded my suitcase into the car, left a thank you note and a $100 tip for housekeeping, and stopped at the diner one last time. Sandra hugged me, quick and fierce, and handed me a to-go bag. "Pie for the road," she said, "whatever road that is." I drove, but not home, not yet. First, I stopped at the post office to mail the letter. Then I drove to the cemetery, where my mother was buried. I'd never visited alone before, always with family, always with an agenda of appropriate grief. This time, I sat on the grass beside her headstone and told her everything. About the journal, the tattoo, the week of watching my absence go unnoticed. I told her I finally understood what she'd tried to live and failed, that disappearing isn't about running away. Sometimes it's about stopping the performance so you can remember who you are without an audience. A groundskeeper walked by, nodded politely. I wondered what he saw. A grieving daughter, a lonely woman, a person finally having the conversation that mattered. All true, none complete. My phone buzzed. Michael, finally. Did you take my car keys? Can't find them anywhere. I almost laughed, but it came out as something else, relief, maybe, or recognition. Even now, even with me gone a full week, I was just a possible location for lost objects, a convenience that might have malfunctioned. I texted Michael back, "Check your gym bag." Then I turned off the phone and threw it in the cemetery's trash bin, watching it disappear among coffee cups and dead flowers. The drive from the cemetery took me through our old neighborhood, past the first apartment Michael and I had shared, where we'd been too poor for furniture, but rich in certainty about our future. I slowed, but didn't stop. That couple young, desperate to matter to each other. They were strangers now. I wondered when exactly we'd stopped looking at each other and started looking through each other toward whatever was next. The promotion, the house, the children, the endless accumulation of things that were supposed to mean happiness. At a red light, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. The constellation tattoo peeked out from under my sleeve, still wrapped but already part of me. 7 stars for 7 days, but also for the myth I'd been living. The faithful wife transformed into something fixed and distant, visible but untouchable. I drove to the bank where we'd had our joint accounts for 28 years. The teller, a young man who'd helped me dozens of times, didn't recognize me at first. Something in my posture, maybe, or the way I no longer apologized for taking up space at his window. "I'd like to close my personal account," I said, sliding across the paperwork for the account Michael never knew existed. The one where I'd deposited every grant writing check, every birthday gift from my mother, every found dollar that was mine alone. $47,000 and change. Not a fortune, but enough. Enough to be more than a ghost. Enough to stop haunting my own life. The teller processed everything efficiently, then paused. "Are you sure about this, Mrs. Patterson? Such a big change." "I've never been more sure of anything," I said, and his expression shifted from concern to something like admiration. Outside the bank, holding the cashier's check that represented decades of invisible labor, I felt my phone's absence like a phantom limb. But there was no one I needed to call, no one waiting for my response. The freedom of that still felt new, like wearing shoes that actually fit after years of cramping your feet into something too small. I drove past the house, our house, though it had never really felt like mine. Michael's car was in the driveway, Emma's too. They were both home, probably wondering about dinner, about where fresh towels might be, about all the small magics I'd performed that they'd mistaken for nature. The mailman was just arriving, and I watched him push the envelope I'd sent through the slot. In a different story, I might have rushed to retrieve it, might have chosen the familiar pain over the uncertain freedom. But I wasn't living that story anymore. Instead, I drove to the storage unit I'd rented 6 months ago. The one where I'd slowly been moving pieces of my self-photo albums Michael had banished to the attic. My mother's paintings. The novel I'd written during Emma's naptime years and never shown anyone. Everything that was mine before, I'd dissolved into being theirs. The novel manuscript sat on top, 80,000 words about a woman who discovers she can walk through walls, only to realize she's been walking through her own life the same way. I'd thought it was fiction when I wrote it. Now I understood it was prophecy, or maybe diagnosis. My new phone, the one I'd picked up after leaving the bank, buzzed with its first message. Carol, somehow knowing, the letter arrived yet? Just delivered it. And now I find out what comes after the ending. It's not an ending, Maggie. It's finally a beginning. She was right, but also wrong. It was both the end of one woman and the beginning of another, or maybe the same woman finally choosing visibility after decades of practiced disappearance. I spent one last night in the motel, unable to leave just yet. Paradise Inn had become a strange kind of home, a place where I'd been purely myself for the first time in memory. Sandra had left a note at the front desk. Rooms paid for if you need it. Sometimes the road forward requires one more night of rest. In room 19, I opened my mother's journal to the page I'd marked her list of things she'd wanted to do before she died. Travel alone, learn to swim, tell the truth about everything, apologize less, take up space, be difficult when necessary. Stop pretending grateful was the same as happy. She'd crossed off only one. Stop pretending grateful was the same as happy. I pulled out my own notebook and started my own list. Drive to the ocean. Call Julia back. Write another novel. Learn my real name, not wife, not mother, but whatever I was underneath all that. Stop memorizing everyone else's needs. Remember my own. The last item I wrote slowly, carefully. Stop disappearing. My phone rang at exactly 9 p.m. Michael, from a number I didn't recognize. I got your letter, he said without preamble. His voice sounded different, smaller maybe, or just farther away than 43 miles. And? Emma's crying. She says she didn't know you were gone. She didn't. How could she not know her mother was missing for a week? The question hung between us, heavy with irony he couldn't hear. How could they not know? The same way they hadn't known anything about me for years, because knowing required looking, and looking required believing there was something to see. I wasn't missing, Michael. I was absent. There's a difference. Where are you? Does it matter? He paused so long, I thought he'd hung up. Then, I found the grant writing files. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have heard me if I had? This time the silence was answer enough. The insurance papers were right where you said, he continued, falling back on logistics, always more comfortable with tasks than emotions. And the mortgage information, very thorough. I've always been thorough. You just thought it was magic. That's not... I didn't mean... Yes, you did. We both did. We agreed without ever discussing it that I would become invisible, so your life could stay visible. And it worked perfectly, until I realized I was haunting my own existence. Come home. We can talk about this. I am home, I said, looking around room 19 with its water-stained ceiling and rattling heater. More honest than any room in the house I'd left. Just not the one you're sitting in. After I hung up, I sat with my mother's journal one more time, reading her final entry again. She died before she could tell me that invisibility was a choice, but she left me something better. the evidence of her own struggle, proof that I wasn't alone in this dissolution, this fight to exist. At midnight, I added one more line to her journal, below her last entry. Message received, Mom. Your daughter is finally visible, especially to herself. The next morning, I checked out of Paradise Inn for the last time. Sandra wasn't working, but she'd left something at the desk, a road atlas with a sticky note. For wherever you're not disappearing to next. I drove west, toward an ocean I'd never seen alone, toward a life I couldn't yet imagine, but was finally ready to discover. In my purse, the cashier's check and my mother's journal. On my wrist, 7 stars marking the days it took to understand that being essential to everyone else's life had made me invisible in my own. The letter would have been read by now. They would be adjusting, recalibrating, probably angry at the inconvenience more than the absence. Emma would learn to do her own laundry. Michael would discover where we kept the coffee filters. Jake might not notice for months, or ever. But I would notice. Every single day, I would notice myself present, visible, taking up exactly as much space as I deserved. The suitcase that had started this journey still sat in my back seat. But it felt lighter now, carrying only what was mine, nothing of the weight I'd been carrying for others. 200 miles from everything I'd known, I pulled over at a scenic overlook. The view was nothing special, highway and hills and sky, but it was mine to see with eyes that were no longer looking for everyone else's needs. I stood there, visible to passing cars, to the wind, to myself, understanding finally what my mother had tried to write, what Sandra had seen, what Julia had heard in my voice. I hadn't disappeared to see if anyone would notice. I disappeared to see if I would notice myself. And I did. God help me. I finally did. Thank you for listening to my story. Sometimes the most important person to find is yourself.